Liberals are proposing is making it harder for small businesses to grow their companies. They're talking about making it harder for the family farmer to pass his farm down to the next generation.
Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is hammering the Liberal government's proposed tax changes to corporations, the so-called closing of loopholes. It's a key part of his attack strategy against the government, as MPs are set to return to Parliament tomorrow. But a Conservative senator is now causing some internal problems for the party. What can we expect from the Conservatives on a whole list of files? To find out, I'm now joined by the Conservative Party leader, Andrew Scheer. Good to see you.
Great to see you again.
All right, I want to start with the Conservative Senator Lynn Beyak, who said in a recent Senate website post that Aboriginals should trade their status cards for Canadian citizenship. Will you boot her out of caucus?
Well, first of all, I'm so proud to be part of the party that acknowledged the residential schools issue, that historic apology. Prime Minister Harper articulated why it was the wrong thing to do, why it was damaging to First Nations community. I wholeheartedly endorse and I'm proud of that apology. So her views are not the views of the Conservative Party. They're not the views of the Conservative caucus. I believe in having a positive, respectful approach to First Nations issues, and Senator Beyak no longer has a role in our caucus, that she's no longer.
She's not on the Aboriginal committee,
right.
But this is sort of strike two.
Yeah. First,
she defended residential schools, which she's doubled down on, as you know. Like, they weren't as bad as people think. Maybe she should check out the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report.
Yeah, to talk to many of the survivors,
right.
Many of the people who have come and shared their stories with either a parliamentary committee or in the Truth and Reconciliation.
So lay down the hammer. Would you say, you know what, there's no room for that view in my party. You're out of the caucus. There's independent senators now. Are you going to boot her?
My message to everyone in our caucus is the Conservative Party of Canada has to have a positive and inclusive and welcoming message. There are a lot of issues facing First Nations Canadians, Indigenous Canadians. The Conservative Party wants to be partners in that. We want to have partnerships to prosperity.
But that's not her message. Her message does not sound like your message.
Well, everyone in the team needs to make that decision about if they're going to buy into that message, buy into that challenge we have as Conservatives sometimes is getting that positive message out. And one of the things that I spoke a lot during the leadership campaign is that it is Conservative policies that actually improve the lives of Canadians, First Nations, Indigenous, otherwise. We need to be excited and talk about that side of it. So confrontational approaches, confrontational styles, combative styles.
I get it. You're the leader. Have you picked up the phone and called her?
I have. We are trying to ensure that every member of our caucus has that positive outlook and can communicate these things in a way that will resonate.
You've called her.
I'm not going to speak about every internal
okay, but let me just ask you, because I want to move on to other issues, but is there a sort of Damocles hanging over her? And have you said to her, you're either out, you're thinking about booting her out, or she's this close? I mean, this is a leadership moment for you.
Look, absolutely, and my leadership team in the Senate is currently dealing with this, and my message to everyone in caucus is that we have an opportunity here to show Canadians over the next 2 years that we're ready to govern, that we've got a government in waiting, and that's a government for all Canadians. And members of Parliament, members of the Senate who share in that can play a valuable role. Members who don't have to make that decision.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens there. Let's talk about the big issue, and Bill Morneau, the finance minister, was on this program last week, and he's defended the closing of certain, what he calls, loopholes as all about tax fairness. What's your view?
It's completely false, and he keeps changing his message. Let's be very clear about one thing. This is going to hurt the very people the Liberals claim it will help. This will result in fewer jobs available. This is a direct assault on the people who create the jobs for salaried employees. And they keep using these ridiculous examples of someone making $50,000 a year paying more in tax than someone making $300,000 a year. They throw those numbers out without any backing up. What we're talking about here is legitimate tax measures that people have built an entire life plan or a business plan around that allows them to create jobs. You talk to people who aren't making a lot of money in their small business, and they use some of these savings so that if there's a downturn, if there's a drop in tourism, if there's a bad year on the farm.
Let me just play devil's advocate. His argument is those people won't be affected.
But he's wrong. The very people that are coming out to, look at the town halls that are happening. Our members of Parliament are going out, the chambers across the country, chambers of commerce, they're having people coming out who are not wealthy and who are...
Why is it different than when Jim Flaherty closed up the income trusts? There was a huge hue and cry, how could you do it? Why is this different than when Flaherty said, this is just an unfair tax advantage to a few people.
This is apples and oranges, Evan. This is about a legitimate tool under our tax system that allows small businesses to save for their own business. This is what's being attacked here.
So what would you do differently? Would you leave the system as it is?
The Conservative Party of Canada will always try to find ways to make it easier for people to create jobs in our local communities. And what really strikes me about this is now the third or fourth time that the Liberals have invented a new way to raise taxes. The Conservative Party of Canada, we don't wake up in the morning trying to think, well, how can the government raise more revenue? We look at ways to lower taxes. The government of Canada does not have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. This isn't the answer.
Okay, so you wouldn't change any of that. Let's talk about NAFTA. On the 23rd of September, the third round of NAFTA negotiations begin right here in Ottawa. Your foreign affairs critic, Aaron O'Toole, was on this program, and he said the Liberals' plan to include gender, labor standards, and other issues are quote-unquote virtue signaling. I'm not 100% sure I understand what the term virtue signaling is, but that's what he said. Why is it a problem for the Liberals to want to include those standards in NAFTA? After all, Canadian companies are competing against Mexican companies who don't have to meet the same environmental standards and labor standards as Canadian companies. That gives them a massive competitive advantage. I would think that Canada and the U.S. would be pushing them to meet those same standards. What's the problem with that?
I think it's very important that we ensure that any trade deal allows Canada and each country that's being part of that deal to have sovereignty over its own environmental legislation, and nobody would dispute that. And there are existing elements within NAFTA and other trade deals that allow for that, and I think that's important. But what we have to make sure is at the end of the day that this is a free trade deal. This is about market access. This is about the ability for Canadians to buy and sell into the United States and Mexico. And the more issues that the Liberal government puts into that mix that are not economic, that don't speak to competitiveness issues, as you've just raised, that aren't focused on those things.
But those do.
Then, not everything that the Liberals...
But don't you think a Canadian, look at the auto industry. If they could pay their auto worker less than we can, if they have lower labor standards and environmental standards than our companies, doesn't that in a free trade environment give them a competitive advantage? Wouldn't you want in a renegotiation to make sure there's a level playing field?
We can absolutely make sure that there are level playing fields on many of these issues. But I think what the point needs to be made is not everything that the Liberals are talking about, including in that, actually speaks to Canadian competitiveness. It speaks to other issues.
Yeah.
You know, they've thrown a lot of these out there that have nothing to do.
Virtue signaling?
You know, I think it might mean different things to different people, but it's more what we're concerned about is that the Liberals are now including things in this measure that won't keep Canadian companies competitive, but that will just achieve other items on the Liberal agenda. Items that may be worth discussing and debating and having conversations about, but aren't linked to creating jobs or protecting the jobs we have.
Last question. Ballistic missile defense. On Friday, North Korea launched yet another missile over Japan. And there's going to be a question, should Canada now join what's called ballistic missile defense? Join the United States in something that the Martin government rejected in '95 and the Harper government never joined. And now we've had a general say, look, the United States is not under any obligation at all to defend Canada were a missile to come at all. Has that, if you were the Prime Minister, would you have Canada join ballistic missile defense?
You know, what the General said just a few days ago should be an eye-opener for everyone not only in our government, but for Canadians in general. We have always had this idea that that we live under the United States umbrella, that, you know, that we can count on them for a lot of these things. So when we hear things like that, it should really force some thinking. And I'm not convinced that the Prime Minister is taking this seriously. This is a key issue here. North Korea, the threat from North Korea is only going in one direction.
Is your gut instinct, the world has changed, we need to rethink ballistic missile defense and join?
We need to have a serious conversation about it. There are some serious concerns about the fact that now
it's on the
there's
table.
This gap.
It's on the table.
I don't know about you, Evan, but I was pretty worried when I saw that General's remark, and you know, I don't want to take anything for granted. And these threats are real, and whether it's North Korea or radical terrorism, there are growing threats here, and we need to have an adult conversation about this that speaks to the legitimate safety concerns of Canadians.
All right, I got to leave it there. Parliament is back tomorrow. Great to have you in the studio. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure.